Eleanor Whitmore had always been the kind of woman who could quiet a room with nothing more than her presence. To her children, she was a pillar, unyielding, elegant, and endlessly capable. To her neighbors, she was a woman who had somehow managed to balance the relentless storm of single motherhood with dignity and grace. Yet behind the closed doors of their weather-worn house on the edge of Millbrook, her hands bore calluses, her shoulders carried exhaustion, and her heart often beat with a loneliness no one ever suspected. Her eldest daughter, Caroline, was the brightest flame in Eleanor's life. From the time she was little, Caroline had possessed an almost dangerous brilliance, the kind that made teachers lean in, the kind that made strangers smile with admiration. She had dreams as vast as the horizon and the unshakable confidence to believe she could touch them. But as her dreams grew, so did the distance between her and the quiet sacrifices her mother made to hold their fragile world together. Caroline wanted more than Millbrook, more than the dusty roads that led to nowhere and the sagging houses that whispered of generations trapped by circumstance. She wanted cities that never slept, stages that roared with applause, and a future built on ambition rather than endurance. Eleanor understood. She had once been Caroline herself, filled with hunger for more, until life had anchored her in place with the weight of bills, sick parents, and children who needed her more than she needed her own dreams. By the time Caroline turned 18, the tension between love and freedom had grown so thick it seemed to wrap itself around every conversation. Caroline would sit at the kitchen table, tapping her foot impatiently as Eleanor carefully spread jam over her younger brother's toast. "Mom," she would start, her voice tight, "you don't get it. If I stay here, I'll suffocate. I need to go. I can't waste my life waiting for things to get better. I need to make them better." Eleanor never stopped her. She never once said the words her heart screamed. "Stay. Don't leave me here alone. Don't abandon the little boy who adores you, the sister who follows you like a shadow." Instead, she swallowed those words, letting them burn in her chest. She wanted Caroline to fly, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. And so, Caroline left. The day she boarded the bus to the city, Eleanor stood at the terminal, holding her youngest children by the hand. She smiled, even as her throat tightened. Caroline's eyes shimmered with excitement, not regret. She hugged her siblings quickly, kissed her mother on the cheek, and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mom. You'll see." Then she disappeared into the bus, her reflection flickering in the dusty window as the vehicle pulled away. Life in the city welcomed Caroline with open arms. At first, it was intoxicating. The lights, the noise, the endless energy that pulsed through every street. She worked long shifts at a cafe, pouring coffee for hurried strangers, while auditioning for theater productions at night. Every rejection stung, but every small success, a callback, a compliment, a fleeting role, fueled her fire. She told herself she was on the verge of something great, that the sacrifices her family had made would not be in vain. Back home, Eleanor learned to navigate the silence Caroline left behind. She filled the house with routines: early mornings, long hours at the textile factory, evenings helping with homework. Her younger children grew, slowly learning how to live without the guiding presence of their sister. Eleanor tried to keep them connected to Caroline's world, reading aloud the rare letters she sent, showing them the photographs Caroline mailed, images of her smiling on crowded streets, her arm draped around new friends whose faces meant nothing to them. "Look," Eleanor would say, forcing brightness into her tone, "she's happy. She's making it." But the photographs told another story, one Eleanor could see between the lines. The sparkle in Caroline's eyes looked strained, the smiles a little too forced. The city was not an easy lover. It demanded more than it gave, and Caroline was still a young woman learning its language. Months became years. Caroline's phone calls grew less frequent. At first, she called every week, her voice bubbling with excitement as she described auditions, part-time jobs, and the friends she had made. Then the calls slipped to once a month, then once every few months. Eventually, Eleanor stopped waiting by the phone altogether. She pretended she didn't notice, but at night, lying awake in the quiet of her small room, she prayed that her daughter was safe. Caroline's rise in the city was not meteoric. It was a slow climb up a jagged hill. She worked grueling hours, often skipping meals to pay rent. She shared cramped apartments with strangers, trusted people she shouldn't have, and sacrificed pieces of herself to keep her dreams alive. Yet she clung to the belief that all of it was temporary, that one day she would break through the gray sky and touch the stars. Her big chance finally came when she was 22. After countless auditions, she landed a role in an off-Broadway production. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay barely covered her rent, but it was real. It was a door opening. She poured everything she had into that role, rehearsing until her voice cracked, pushing her body until it ached. When the curtain finally rose on opening night, and the audience erupted in applause, Caroline felt something she had never felt before: validation. Proof that leaving had been worth it. She called Eleanor that night, tears in her eyes, her voice shaking with joy. "Mom," she whispered, "I did it. I'm on stage. People clapped for me. I wish you could have seen it." Eleanor smiled through her own tears. "I'm proud of you, Caroline. I always have been." It was one of the last long conversations they shared before life swallowed Caroline whole again. Success was sweet but fleeting. The theater world was ruthless, and while Caroline tasted its sweetness, she also felt its sting. Roles slipped through her fingers, opportunities vanished, and rejections piled higher than her triumphs. She smiled for photographs, laughed at parties, and pretended everything was fine, but inside, she was crumbling. The friends who had once cheered her on drifted away, chasing their own ambitions. The city that had once felt like a promise now felt like a predator, devouring her piece by piece. One night, after a particularly brutal rejection, Caroline sat alone in her apartment, staring at the phone. She thought about calling her mother, about confessing that she was tired, that the weight of her choices was crushing her. But pride held her back. She couldn't admit weakness. She couldn't let her mother know that the daughter who had left to chase greatness was falling apart. So she stayed silent. Back in Millbrook, Eleanor sensed it anyway. A mother always does. The winter Caroline turned 24 was the harshest she had ever known. Not because of the snow piling against the city's sidewalks or the biting wind that sliced through her coat, but because of the silence that settled into her life. Opportunities grew thinner, and the enthusiasm that once burned in her voice had dulled to embers. She still worked, always working, always rehearsing, always chasing, but the applause came less often, and the loneliness pressed heavier on her chest with each passing season. Her apartment was smaller now. A single room carved from a once grand building whose paint peeled like tired skin. The radiator hissed more than it warmed, and the neighbors argued loudly through paper-thin walls. Caroline often sat on her narrow bed at night, clutching her knees to her chest, staring at the city lights that twinkled outside her window like mocking stars. She told herself she was strong enough, that she would endure, that this was all part of the journey. But sometimes she wondered if she had confused resilience with punishment. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued her quiet march through life in Millbrook. She woke before dawn, prepared lunches, walked to the factory, and returned home just as the evening settled. Her younger children were growing. Her son, Thomas, now a lanky teenager with a restless energy, and her daughter, Lily, blossoming into a girl who loved books and dreamed of becoming a teacher. They adored their mother, but they carried the shadow of their sister's absence everywhere they went. Every birthday candle was blown out with a silent wish. "I hope Caroline calls this year." Occasionally, Caroline did call. On Christmas, on birthdays, when guilt gnawed at her too sharply to ignore. Her voice was always cheerful, always painting pictures of success that were brighter than her reality. "Things are going well, Mom," she would say. "I'm working on new projects. I've met some important people." Eleanor listened, never questioning, though she could hear the fatigue hidden beneath her daughter's practiced tone. She longed to tell Caroline she didn't have to pretend, that failure wouldn't make her less loved. But Eleanor knew that sometimes dreams were the only thing keeping a person alive, and she would never risk extinguishing her daughter's fragile flame. Then came the letter. It arrived one damp spring afternoon, tucked between bills and advertisements in the worn mailbox by the front porch. Eleanor recognized her daughter's handwriting immediately: bold, slanted, hurried. She tore it open with trembling fingers, her eyes racing over the words. Caroline wrote of a new role, of hope returning, of a chance that felt like the beginning of everything she had wanted. "It's small, but it's real," the letter said. "If this works, I might finally get noticed. Pray for me, Mom." I think this is it. Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest, whispering a prayer into the quiet kitchen. She wanted to believe, needed to believe. Perhaps this time, her daughter's tide was turning. For a brief while, it seemed true. Caroline's small role in a touring production brought her modest recognition. The company traveled from city to city, and Caroline saw places she had only ever dreamed of: Chicago's glittering skyline, Boston's historic streets, the wide expanse of Texas skies. Each performance rekindled the fire within her, and she began to remember why she had chosen this path. The applause reminded her she mattered, that her sacrifices had weight. But the tour ended, as all things did, and Caroline returned to New York with nothing but memories and an empty wallet. The city welcomed her back with its familiar cruelty: overdue rent, rejection letters, and the gnawing hunger of uncertainty. Her phone buzzed with texts from acquaintances who had cheered her on while she was working, but when she failed to land the next role, their messages dwindled. Soon, she was alone again, staring at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, wondering if the woman looking back was still the dreamer she once knew. One evening, Caroline received a call from Thomas. His voice had deepened, almost unrecognizable. "Caroline," he said, awkward but earnest, "I miss you." She froze, her throat tightening. He told her about school, about the basketball team, about how Mom still worked too much, and how Lily had started writing poems. He didn't ask her about the city, about auditions, about dreams. He just wanted his sister. That night, Caroline wept into her pillow, the weight of her choices pressing harder than ever. She had left to build a life that would make them proud, but what if all she had built was distance? Time slipped by in uneven rhythms. Weeks that felt like years, months that vanished in a blink. Caroline's 20s became a blur of effort, survival, and fleeting triumphs. She aged faster than she realized, her eyes carrying shadows of exhaustion even when her lips curved into practiced smiles. Yet still, she refused to give up. The idea of returning home felt like defeat, like proving everyone who doubted her right. She told herself she couldn't go back until she had something tangible to show. Meanwhile, Eleanor's health began to falter. Years of labor at the factory had worn her body down, her back aching with every step, her hands stiff from repetitive strain. She told no one, not even her children, about the doctor's warnings. She couldn't afford to stop, not when bills still piled on the table. She carried her pain quietly, as she had carried everything else in her life. When Lily noticed her mother wincing as she bent to tie her shoes, she begged Eleanor to rest. "Mom, please, let me help more." Eleanor only smiled, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. "You already help more than you should, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." But Lily did worry. And Thomas did too, even if he didn't say it aloud. The absence of Caroline made their mother's burden feel heavier to them both. The turning point came one rainy night when Caroline collapsed backstage during a rehearsal. The director dismissed it as exhaustion, but the truth was harsher. She had been pushing her body past its limits, eating little, sleeping less, and drowning in stress. The hospital bill nearly broke her, but the nurse's gentle scolding broke her spirit even more. "You're young," the woman said, "but you're burning out. If you don't slow down, there won't be anything left of you to give." Lying in the sterile hospital bed, Caroline thought of home, the smell of her mother's cooking, the sound of Thomas's laughter, the sight of Lily curled up with a book. She hadn't seen them in years. She hadn't been there for birthdays, graduations, small triumphs, or tears. She had traded their presence for a dream that was slipping further from her grasp. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling, and scrolled to her mother's number. For a long moment, she stared, paralyzed by guilt. What could she say? "I'm sorry. I miss you. I need you." The words felt too heavy, too late. So she set the phone down, tears streaming silently, and fell asleep with regret pooling in her chest. Back in Millbrook, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same old phone. Some part of her always expected it to ring, always hoped. She didn't know that on the other side of the state, her daughter was thinking of her too, longing for the comfort she had once taken for granted. The distance between them was no longer just miles. It was years of silence, pride, and unspoken love. The first snow of December drifted softly through the New York night, blanketing the city in a fragile silence. Caroline walked slowly through the streets, her scarf pulled tightly against the wind, her heart heavier than the bag she carried. She had just left another audition, another "thank you, we'll be in touch." That meant nothing. The ache in her chest deepened as she thought of her mother, of the home she had abandoned, of the time she could never reclaim. That night, back in her apartment, she finally made the call. Her hands shook as she pressed her mother's number, her breath catching when the line rang. And then, hello? Eleanor's voice, older, thinner, but still unmistakably filled with warmth. Caroline closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered. The silence that followed was brief, but it felt like eternity. Then Eleanor's voice trembled. "Caroline? Oh, my baby, is it really you?" Caroline choked out an apology, the words tumbling over themselves. "Sorry for leaving. Sorry for the years of silence. Sorry for not being there when they needed her." Eleanor listened quietly, tears streaking her own cheeks, her hand pressed against her chest as though holding her heart in place. "Hush now," she said softly. "You're talking to your mother. There is nothing you could do to make me stop loving you." That night stretched into hours as they spoke. Caroline heard about Thomas, now nearly grown, about Lily's endless poems, about the town that had changed little while the years flew by. She also heard the fatigue in her mother's voice, the strain Eleanor tried to hide. Caroline asked about her health, but Eleanor brushed it aside with the same gentle deflections as always. Still, Caroline knew. She could hear it in the pauses, in the faint groans between words. For the first time in years, Caroline felt the pull of home stronger than her pride. She promised to visit soon, though fear knotted in her stomach. What if they looked at her with disappointment? What if she saw her mother's face and realized too late how much she had wasted? The trip back to Millbrook was surreal. The train carried her through landscapes she hadn't seen in nearly a decade, fields stretching endlessly, small towns with familiar silhouettes, skies that seemed wider than those above New York. When she stepped off at the modest station, her chest tightened at the sight of the town she had once found too small, too suffocating. Now it felt like sanctuary. Eleanor was waiting. She looked frielier than Caroline remembered, her shoulders slightly stooped, her hair streaked with silver. But when their eyes met, everything else faded. Caroline dropped her bags and ran into her mother's arms. They clung to each other, both sobbing, their bodies trembling with the release of years of longing. Thomas appeared next, taller than Caroline now, his face carrying traces of the boy she had left behind. He hugged her fiercely, anger and love colliding in his grip. "You left us," he muttered, but he didn't let go. Lily stood a little behind, shy at first. Then she too folded into her sister's embrace, whispering, "I wrote poems about you." Caroline laughed through her tears, promising she would read every single one that evening. The family gathered around the kitchen table. The house smelled the same: wood, bread, and something indefinably home. Caroline realized that nothing in the world could compare to the simple comfort of this room, these walls, these people. And yet, as she looked closer at her mother's face, she saw the toll of years of labor and loneliness. When Eleanor excused herself to rest, Caroline followed her into the small bedroom. She helped her mother sit on the bed, noticing the way Eleanor's hands trembled. "Mom," she said gently, "are you sick?" Eleanor smiled weakly. "I'm just tired, darling. Life wears on us all." But Caroline wasn't convinced. She insisted on accompanying her to the doctor the next day. The news was sobering. Eleanor had been living with a heart condition for years, worsened by stress and overwork. It wasn't immediately fatal, but it required care, rest, and support, things she had denied herself to keep her family afloat. Caroline sat with the doctor's words echoing in her mind, guilt gnawing at her insides. While she had been chasing applause in distant cities, her mother had been silently sacrificing her health. Tears burned her eyes as she grasped Eleanor's frail hand. "I should have been here," she whispered. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You are here now. That's what matters." In the weeks that followed, Caroline made the decision she once thought impossible. She stayed. She picked up part-time work in town, humble but steady, and helped with the bills. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and read Lily's poems late into the night. She watched Thomas play basketball, cheering louder than anyone in the stands. Slowly, the siblings who had once felt abandoned began to see her not as the sister who left, but as the sister who had returned. Yet, deep inside, Caroline still wrestled with shame. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by her mother's bedside, listening to her steady breathing, and wonder if her return was too late to erase the years of absence. One night, unable to hold it in, she whispered, "Mom, do you ever resent me?" Eleanor stirred, then opened her eyes, gazing at her daughter with unwavering love. "Caroline, resentment has no place in a mother's heart. I only ever wanted you to be happy. And if the world hurt you along the way, then let me be the one to remind you that you are still loved." Those words became the balm Caroline never knew she needed. Months turned into a year. Caroline never fully gave up her dream, but she learned to hold it differently. She performed at the local community theater, her voice once meant for grand stages, now filling modest rooms with sincerity. The applause was smaller, but it felt pure, grounded in the faces of those who loved her. And when she bowed at the end of a performance, her eyes always found her mother's in the crowd, shining with pride. One evening, after a show, Thomas asked her, "Do you regret it? Leaving? Coming back?" Caroline thought long and hard before answering. "I regret the time I lost, but I don't regret the lessons. Sometimes life breaks us just enough so we can see what truly matters." Years later, when Eleanor's heart finally gave out, she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children. Caroline sat by her side, holding her hand until the very end, whispering the words she had once struggled to say, "Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry." The grief was sharp, but it was softened by the knowledge that love had the final word. Caroline carried her mother's lessons forward, teaching Lily to pursue her dreams with balance, guiding Thomas as he stumbled into adulthood, and reminding herself daily that family was not a chain to hold her back, but a foundation to keep her steady. The applause she had once chased now came in quieter forms. Lily's smile when she shared a new poem, Thomas's laugh echoing through the house, the memory of her mother's gentle hand on her cheek. These became her ovations, her standing ovations in the theater of life. And Caroline finally understood, success was never about the stage, the lights, or the crowd. Success was about love, the kind that endures mistakes, distances, and time itself.